Imagine building a car company where selling more cars could actually make the company less valuable. Ferrari could produce more cars. It could accept more customers. It could generate billions more in immediate revenue. But it doesn't. Because Ferrari understands a brutal truth about luxury. When everyone can afford it, everyone can access it, and everyone can get it immediately, the magic starts to disappear. Ferrari has spent decades doing something almost every other car company refuses to do. It deliberately controls supply. It protects waiting lists. It limits access. And it makes customers want a Ferrari even more by making it harder to get one. But here's the question. Why would a company ever turn away people who are ready to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars? And how can saying no actually make Ferrari billions? To understand that, you have to understand that Ferrari isn't really in the business of selling cars. It's in the business of selling scarcity. Every normal car company wants the same thing. More factories. More production. More dealerships. More customers. More sales. More market share. If demand increases, the typical response is simple. Build more cars. Ferrari takes a completely different approach. In 2024, Ferrari shipped approximately 13,752 vehicles worldwide. For a global automaker, that number is incredibly small. Companies like Toyota, Volkswagen, Ford, and General Motors sell millions of vehicles. Ferrari sells thousands. Yet Ferrari generated approximately 6.68 billion euros in revenue in 2024. Even more impressive, the company generated roughly 2.56 billion euros in adjusted EBITDA. That's an adjusted EBITDA margin of approximately 38%. For a company that manufactures cars, that level of profitability is extraordinary. So Ferrari doesn't need to dominate the market through volume. It dominates through value. And this is where the Ferrari business model becomes fascinating. Ferrari doesn't ask, how many cars can we sell? It asks, how many cars can we sell without destroying the exclusivity that makes those cars desirable? That difference is worth billions. Think about luxury for a moment. If you walk into a store and see 5,000 identical luxury watches sitting on the shelves, the product feels different. Now imagine being told that only a few hundred exist. Suddenly, the exact same physical object feels more valuable. Why? Because scarcity changes perception. Human beings don't value everything based purely on its physical usefulness. We value things based on rarity, status, identity, and access. Ferrari understands this. A Ferrari isn't simply a machine that moves you from one place to another. A $300,000 Ferrari doesn't provide 30 times the transportation value of a $10,000 car. That's not the point. The customer is buying something else. They're buying engineering. They're buying racing heritage. They're buying Italian design. They're buying status. They're buying an emotional experience. And most importantly, they're buying something that not everyone can have. That final part is incredibly important. Because if Ferrari suddenly became available to everyone, some of the value would disappear. This is why Ferrari's low-volume strategy is so important. Ferrari has repeatedly emphasized that controlled growth is part of protecting the brand's exclusivity. The company doesn't want to flood the market. Because Ferrari understands something that mass-market companies often struggle with. Growth can destroy scarcity. Imagine Ferrari suddenly deciding to manufacture 500,000 cars every year. Revenue would explode. At first, investors might celebrate. Dealerships would be packed. More people would own Ferraris. But something else would happen. Seeing a Ferrari would become normal. The badge would become less rare. The experience would become less exclusive. And eventually, Ferrari would have to spend enormous amounts of money rebuilding the prestige it destroyed by chasing volume. That's the luxury paradox. Sometimes the easiest way to make a product more valuable is to make it harder to get. But Ferrari's strategy goes even deeper. Because Ferrari doesn't simply control how many cars it produces. It also cultivates relationships with its customers. In 2024, approximately 81% of Ferrari's new cars were sold to people who already owned at least one Ferrari. And around 48% were sold to customers who owned multiple Ferraris. Think about what that means. Ferrari isn't constantly starting from zero. It has built a customer ecosystem. Someone buys their first Ferrari. Then, over time, that customer may buy another. Then another. Perhaps a special edition. Perhaps a track-focused model. Perhaps a limited production Ferrari. Perhaps a personalized vehicle. The customer relationship becomes more valuable with every purchase. And this is one of the most powerful advantages of luxury businesses. They don't necessarily need millions of customers. They need the right customers. Now let's talk about something almost every Ferrari fan knows about. The waiting list. For a normal business, a waiting list can be frustrating. If you want a product and the company tells you to wait 2 years, you might simply buy something else. But in luxury, the waiting list can actually increase demand. Why? Because waiting communicates scarcity. If something is available immediately, you assume supply is abundant. If people are waiting months or years to get it, you assume demand must be enormous. The waiting period itself becomes part of the psychological value. It's almost like an exclusive membership. You aren't simply buying a car. You're gaining access to something other people are still waiting for. Ferrari has used carefully managed allocations and waiting lists to maintain this balance. The objective isn't to make customers angry. The objective is to keep demand ahead of supply. And that's a crucial distinction. Ferrari doesn't want customers to think, "Nobody wants this car." It wants customers to think, "Everyone wants this car, but not everyone can get one." That is incredibly powerful. And then comes one of Ferrari's biggest profit engines. Personalization. A Ferrari isn't necessarily a standardized product. Customers can customize enormous parts of the vehicle. Colors. Leather. Carbon fiber. Stitching. Seats. Wheels. Interior materials. Special finishes. And countless other details. For an ordinary automaker, customization can become expensive and complicated. For Ferrari, it becomes an opportunity. Because a wealthy customer isn't necessarily asking, "How can I get the cheapest Ferrari?" They're often asking, "How can I make my Ferrari different from every other Ferrari?" That's a completely different purchasing psychology. And Ferrari can monetize that desire. Instead of simply increasing the number of cars sold, Ferrari can increase the value of each car. This is one reason the company's strategy is so powerful. It doesn't need to manufacture dramatically more vehicles to generate significantly more revenue. It can make the existing customer more valuable. And that leads to one of the most important concepts in business. Pricing power. Pricing power means a company can increase prices without destroying demand. Most companies don't have much of it. If a fast food restaurant suddenly doubles its prices, customers leave. If a smartphone company increases its price by 50%, competitors can attract buyers. But luxury brands operate differently. When demand is strong and supply is limited, customers may tolerate dramatically higher prices. Ferrari has spent decades building that pricing power. And pricing power is one of the most valuable assets a company can have. Because higher prices don't necessarily require proportionally higher costs. If Ferrari can sell a car for significantly more while manufacturing costs don't increase at the same rate, additional revenue flows disproportionately toward profit. That's why Ferrari's margins matter. The company isn't simply selling expensive cars. It's building a business where the brand itself allows Ferrari to capture more economic value from every vehicle. Now here's where the strategy becomes even more interesting. Ferrari isn't competing with Toyota. It's not really competing with BMW. It's not even competing with Porsche in exactly the same way. Ferrari is competing for something much more abstract. Desirability. The company wants people to look at a Ferrari and immediately recognize that it represents something different. That's why Formula One matters. That's why Ferrari's racing history matters. That's why the logo matters. That's why the sound, design, color, and heritage matter. Every element reinforces the same message. This isn't an ordinary car. And the more consistently Ferrari communicates that message, the more valuable the brand becomes. But there is a dangerous line Ferrari has to avoid. Too much scarcity can become frustrating. Too much exclusivity can push customers away. Too many restrictions can create resentment. And too much production can destroy the brand. So Ferrari has to find the perfect balance. It has to produce enough cars to generate billions in revenue. But not enough to make Ferrari ordinary. It has to satisfy customers. But not make access effortless. It has to introduce new models. But not destroy the rarity of the brand. It has to grow. But not grow too fast. That's an incredibly difficult business problem. And Ferrari has spent decades learning how to manage it. Now consider what would happen if Ferrari abandoned this strategy. Imagine waking up tomorrow and seeing Ferrari dealerships everywhere. Imagine Ferrari advertisements on every television channel. Imagine massive discounts.